As far as films go, the early 2000s was a very odd time to grow up in. It was the rise of all sorts of new technology and filmmaking techniques, but as kids, we were completely oblivious to it. Not only were we oblivious to how each film was being made, but to the quality of the films we watched too. We really accepted almost anything that was given to us. After all, we were just kids. One film from the small period of time that continues to fascinate me more and more as time goes by is the 2002 Scooby-Doo movie. Yes, you heard that right.
Now listen up. There is absolutely no such thing.
I have a weird fascination with this film. It may be one of the strangest children's films ever made, and I feel it's something that should be talked about a lot more instead of simply passed off as a children's film that we should just ignore. Today I'm here to unravel the mystery. Is the live-action Scooby-Doo movie a pile of trash or a cinematic masterpiece?
When I find him, I'll give him a good dose of puppy power! Ta-da!
Oh god, he's peeing on me!
Okay, so maybe referring to this film as a cinematic masterpiece is a bit of a stretch, but it's still a very fascinating movie. A lot of what draws me to this film is its rich history on its troubled production and how it all led up to what we got. At this point, it is fairly common knowledge that the original intent of the Scooby-Doo movie was to create a film more geared towards the teen demographic. This would be in the same vein as the 1995 film The Brady Bunch movie, which was a satire of the original series and its tropes. Development on the film was started way back in 1994, so there were different versions of the script written. Eventually, Raja Gosnell was hired as director, and James Gunn was chosen to write the screenplay. At this point, James Gunn is a pretty well-known writer and director thanks to the Guardians of the Galaxy films, but he actually started out writing films for Troma, a company known for making the trashiest of trashy films.
Transforming little Melvin into a hideously deformed creature of superhuman size and strength. Melvin became the Toxic Avenger.
His original script was said to have been a lot darker and would feature a lot more adult humor. A cast of actors from popular teen movies of the 90s were all cast in the film, expecting the original script to be the movie they would eventually film, but the studio made a last-minute change and made Gunn rewrite it as a children's movie. The script was highly edited into a kid-friendlier version, though still consisted of mostly the same plot, and a lot of the adult humor still managed to make it into the finished product. Just recently, on the 15th anniversary of the film, James Gunn did reveal that the family-friendly film he submitted to the studio had received an R rating and had to be even further edited down to aim for that PG rating the studio wanted so bad. Things that were cut from the film included a few lines of dialogue, a kiss shared between Velma and Daphne during the soul-swapping scene, and supposedly more visible cleavage that had to be hid with CGI, which that's the one that confuses me because the effects in this film are awful, and I have a hard time believing that anyone's boobs in this are being so successfully covered up by early 2000s CG. So basically the film we ended up with was something that could have been so much more, but studio interference sucked a lot of creativity out of it. And while Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island is seen as the best Scooby-Doo movie, it's very likely that the reason for the changes was due to the success of Zombie Island and the more recent straight-to-video Scooby-Doo movies that were being made at the time. Despite wouldn't have preferred the alternative, there's a lot of things I do like about this movie. It's an extremely flawed film, but there's a lot to like as well. It follows Mystery Incorporated 2 years after they have split up, all being invited to a resort called Spooky Island to help Mr. Bean solve the mystery of why his guests are leaving the island looking brainwashed. Something I do admire about the plot is it's fairly simplistic. There's a lot that you could have done with the Scooby-Doo movie, especially since they had years to develop it, but sometimes the simple approach is the best one. Now, there's also some problems I have with how fast they rush the introduction to the mystery. The film starts with the gang quitting after solving the mystery of a terrifying ghost clown, and let's just admit it, this dude was nightmare fuel.
Like there's a ghost right behind me, isn't there?
But we don't really get to know the characters too well or why they would all suddenly quit. You could make the argument that knowing their characters from the cartoon is enough, but it's clear they tried to develop them further in this movie and just didn't give the audience enough time for each of their personalities to really sink in. Scooby-Doo may also be one of the most 2000s films ever made, from the music to the background characters, hair and getup, to the awful CG. It just screams early 2000s. Despite my complaints, there's actually a lot I like about the look of the film. For the most part, the film's production design is pretty great, and I love the aesthetics of Spooky Island. It's such a dumb idea, but it's a place I would totally want to visit if it were real.
Voila.
Nobody's ever given me a stuffed dismembered head before.
The film actually follows a lot of the same beats as Zombie Island, and though a lot of people like to call this a Zombie Island ripoff, I don't actually believe it was intentional. In many ways, this movie is more cartoony than the cartoon itself. It does feature real monsters like Zombie Island, but it doesn't take them as a very serious threat and often uses the monsters for comedy instead. The fact that this movie is so cartoonish is another thing that I do really like about it. It does go a bit overboard at times, especially with its use of sound effects, but if you're gonna make a live-action movie starring a talking, mystery-solving dog, you may as well go all out and be as goofy as possible. There's a few themes in this movie that you feel they wanted to do something clever with, but don't really go anywhere. The main one is with the villain's plan to brainwash teens into leaving the island as well-behaved adults. There's a lot of funny scenes revolving around this, but in the end it doesn't really go anywhere. It's fairly clear to see that had this movie been focused towards teens like originally intended, it could have all meant something, but just became a wasted opportunity.
Sorry, bro.
No big whoop, dog. Yo, did you catch that new vid on the box?
True that. I'm up to snuff on all popular trends.
Word.
I think the cast of this film are actually pretty great. I am not a huge fan of Sarah Michelle Gellar's performance, but she's fine for what she needs to be. I also like what they did with Freddie Prinze Jr. as Fred, giving him more of an egotistical approach that works well for his character.
What's the secret of your success? Teamwork. I do a tremendous amount of teamwork, and I always have a plan.
Matthew Lillard obviously steals the show as Shaggy. He's the most perfect casting you could possibly have. He also does the voice of Shaggy in the cartoons now, which is fantastic. There's a lot of moments in this movie that you can tell a scene was cut out. One scene includes an animated opening sequence with some of the best Scooby-Doo animation ever made. I have no idea why it was taken out of the movie, but I guarantee its addition would have made the film like 25% better. There's also a cutscene in which Velma gets drunk and performs the song Can't Take My Eyes Off of You. It was cut for obvious reasons, but there's a point in this film which she starts acting weird, and I never understood why that was as a kid. If they'd just told me she was drunk, it would have cleared up so much. This movie can often be hard to tell if it's actually funny or just so bad it's funny, but I think that's exactly the tone they were aiming for. And in that sense, there's a lot that I laughed at in this movie.
Carol, it's me. It's Brad. We've known each other since we were like 3.
Back off my grill, son!
Carol, what are you doing?
The majority of jokes are made up of slapstick, jokes that will fly right over kids' heads, and toilet humor, which at this point seems to be kind of a trademark for James Gunn's writing.
I have famously huge turds.
And while a lot of the jokes do feel like they were simply thrown in for kids, there are a few instances of toilet humor that did get a laugh out of me, so they must have done something right.
It's plastic! What do you care? You drink out of the toilet? So do you! Rottweiler eats rat poop! No, Scooby-Doo, your mom eats cat poop!
Also, Scrappy-Doo as a villain is something I find both creative and funny, even if I don't share the same hate for him that everyone else does. I know that Tim Curry was actually going to play Mr. Bean's character, which would have been perfect casting, but left when he found out that Scrappy-Doo was in the movie. So thanks for absolutely nothing, Scrappy. You wasted everyone's time. I hope you rot in hell. And once again, the music in this film is very much a product of its time, featuring music from Outkast, Simple Plan, Baha Men, and Sugar Ray, who even star in this movie.
I count the days till I see you again. You know I tried and I'm sorry. One night can make a difference.
It's actually a miracle they didn't use Baha Men's other song for this.
Who let the dogs out? Who let the dogs out?
As I mentioned earlier, there are some themes of this movie that really go nowhere. I think the movie's biggest problem is that a lot of elements just feel underdeveloped. For example, by the end of this movie, everyone but Scooby gets an underdeveloped heteronormative relationship. I don't think that was the original intention, more so something the studio likely pushed. Fred and Daphne, I guess, are a given just because it's Fred and Daphne, but Mary Jane really has no character, and I have no idea who that guy Velma fell in love with was. Not that it really mattered since she falls in love with Seth Green in the sequel. I'm just glad Scooby didn't end up with like a poodle girlfriend or something. After all, him and Shaggy already share their own complex relationship.
Stop it, Shaggy. I'm not stupid. Are you cheating on me?
So that is pretty much everything I have to say on the Scooby-Doo movie. If I really wanted to, I could talk about it for hours, but I'm not gonna put you through that. Scooby-Doo is not a cinematic masterpiece, but I don't have the heart to call it a pile of trash either. There's quite a lot I like about it. It's a mostly flawed, but fun movie. However, I actually do think that Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed is the better movie because it has a bit more fun with its cartoony logic, and it felt like both Raja Gosnell and James Gunn had a better idea of what they could and couldn't do.
I think Coolsville sucks.
If you think this movie is bad, just be glad it's not the Smurfs or Alvin and the Chipmunks. It feels like it was made by people who actually gave a damn. It just didn't turn out as it was planned, but I can at least respect them for trying.
Whatever the case, Mr. Ink will be there.
Solving mysteries, man.
Righting wrongs, looking for clues, and kicking butt.
Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Goodbye.